In trying to shape his own legacy, Mr. Bush clings to 9/11, claims it as his defining moment. In that much, at least, he is correct. As of today, however, 9/11 now bookends the Bush presidency. What began with failure to heed the warnings of Richard Clark and Sandy Berger, the failure to respond once the FBI confirmed al-Qaeda's responsibility for the USS Cole bombing, compounded now by the failure of Bush justice to get justice for even those he caught, and even this new bin Laden audio tape discovered today mocking Mr. Bush. Richard Wolff is the senior White House correspondent for Newsweek, as well as one of our own political analysts. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
It's hard to imagine anything more ironic, more painfully ironic than this fact that Mr. Bush claimed we had to torture, well, he didn't want to call it torture, we had to do this, let's use his term, to make us safe and to secure justice. If we had another news conference, how do you think Mr. Bush would try to defend today's news, today's result, that Bush justice will now deny us genuine justice, perhaps in the Ghatani case?
Well, it's funny you should raise the question of a news conference, because a couple of years ago I asked him a simple question. I said, what's your definition of torture? And his simplistic response was, whatever the law says it is. Well, now you have the administration official responsible for what's left of the law in this case saying this was torture. So the legalistic defense, the quibbling defense, is off the table. Another defense he often uses is about how he has set up the legal processes and institutions for his successor to deal with the war on terror, as he calls it, and that's also collapsed because, let's face it, the whole military commission system has collapsed. So what's left is the fact that America hasn't been attacked on home territory, and also that there are undoubtedly some bad people locked up in Guantanamo, and there is the suggestion on the right, and certainly from the administration, that there's a link between the two, but there's also, without sounding like Donald Rumsfeld, there's a link in the rooster's mind between his crowing and the rising of the sun, and it's just not clear what the link is.
Judge Crawford worked for Vice President Cheney when Cheney was Defense Secretary. And today, Mr. Cheney acknowledged that there was a possible, the word he used was problem with Ghatani. But Cheney blamed the interrogators. He suggested they misapplied approved techniques. Is history going to buy this, the bad apple defense, or is it going to conclude that Cheney and Gonzalez and Addington and all the rest specifically authorized techniques that in combination got them closer and closer to legalized torture?
Well, the Vice President has also blamed the left wing of the Democratic Party for suggesting that there was any torture going on. So I'm not sure his claims have much weight when it comes to the historical record here. And the record is very weighty when it comes to the chain of command on what they call these enhanced interrogation techniques. The Senate Armed Services Committee just found that Donald Rumsfeld himself authorized these techniques, and of course Crawford too pointed the finger at Donald Rumsfeld. So I don't know that the historians are going to spend much time on saying who was to blame. There was collective responsibility here. The question isn't what happened, but why it happened. Why did they abandon core American values and judicial principles at this moment in time? And that's what historians are going to debate.
But ultimately here, there's an irony that I think will be translated into history, that after 9/11 there was one thing Mr. Bush had to do, and instead he wound up giving bin Laden everything bin Laden wanted. He got the wrong war, he got a fearful country here, a tanking economy, and he gave bin Laden a safe haven in Pakistan. Mr. Bush literally stood on the remains of the dead of New York and vowed to get him, and obviously if he had, America would have rightly or maybe wrongly forgiven virtually everything else that happened. Is that going to stick out as if this president knowingly or unknowingly chose every possible wrong path in the aftermath of what happened on 9/11?
Well, again, the critical question is why he stopped halfway. I mean, they obviously believed in the demonstration effect of taking the fight to the Middle East, but the Middle East and Afghanistan are two very different places, and the demonstration effect of standing up with the head of bin Laden and saying this is what happens to people who attack this country would have been incredibly powerful, much more powerful than reaching into the lower ranks of al-Qaeda and burying their torture and interrogation for years in secrecy. So the question is what the response should have been, and it clearly wasn't sufficient.
Richard Wolff of Newsweek and MSNBC. Great thanks as always, Richard.
Thank you, Keith.